Babysitting was supposed to be easy money. Watch some kid for a few hours, make sure they don't set anything on fire, and go home with a handful of cash. That's what I thought when I answered the ad. It was simple. Live-in babysitter needed for one child must be okay with an isolated location. The pay was generous, almost too generous. But I didn't have the luxury of questioning it. Rent was due, and this seemed like a quick, easy gig. I should have turned around the moment I saw the house. The parents picked me up in town, driving me deep into the forest, miles away from the nearest neighbor. The house was more of a cabin, old but well-maintained. A massive backyard stretched into the endless tree line, and beyond that nothing but government land, a restricted zone marked by faded warning signs. The mother, a thin, pale woman with a nervous energy, gave me the rundown. "The job is easy," she said. "Just keep the doors locked and don't let Eli outside after dark." That last part felt off. I glanced at the dad, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. I tried to shake the uneasy feeling. Maybe they were just overprotective. Eli, the kid, was about 6, maybe 7. Quiet, too quiet. He barely spoke, and when he did, it was short, empty answers. The first few hours were uneventful. Dinner, bedtime, silence. The parents left for the night, driving away without looking back. That's when the weird stuff started. At first it was little things. The radio crackled with static. The TV glitched, showing strange, flickering symbols. I flipped through channels, but every station was the same. White noise, a faint hum, and something almost mechanical beneath it. I chalked it up to interference. We were in the middle of nowhere, after all. Then I found Eli standing by the window, staring out at the forest. He wasn't watching for his parents. He was looking at the sky. I hesitated. "Hey, bud, you okay?" He didn't answer. His eyes reflected the porch light in a way that didn't seem normal. I walked over and crouched beside him. "What are you looking at?" For the first time since I arrived, he spoke. "They come to check on me." My stomach dropped. "Who?" He turned his head slightly, but before he could answer, the porch light flickered, and then I saw it. Movement. Something was out there, standing just beyond the tree line, tall, thin, motionless. I told myself it was just a tree, just a shadow. Then it shifted. Not like a person moving, but like a glitch in a video, snapping from one position to another instantly. The porch light buzzed and died, plunging the yard into darkness. I grabbed Eli and pulled him away from the window. My pulse thundered in my ears. A metallic hum filled the room. The TV screen turned on by itself, displaying more of those impossible symbols. The kitchen radio let out a burst of static, followed by a low voice, a whisper that wasn't in English. Eli barely reacted. He just sat on the couch, his little hands folded neatly in his lap. I took a deep breath, willing my voice to stay calm. "Eli, has this happened before?" He nodded. "Every night." My skin went cold. I turned toward the window again. The figure was gone. But somehow I knew it wasn't gone. It was closer. I kept telling myself it was nothing, a trick of the light, a shadow that just looked human. But that didn't explain the way it snapped from one place to another, the way the electronics flickered the moment it moved. It didn't explain why Eli wasn't scared. I tried to act normal, even as my skin prickled with the sensation of something watching. "Okay," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Let's get you to bed." Eli didn't protest. He climbed under the blankets, tucking himself in with eerily precise movements. No tossing, no adjusting, just stillness. I left the door open a crack and sat on the couch, trying to ignore the TV, which kept flashing static in short bursts, almost like a code. I checked my phone. No signal. I stood up, walking toward the front door. The porch light was still out. The woods were completely dark now, the treetops swaying even though there was no wind. Then I noticed something. The trees at the edge of the yard weren't swaying the same way as the others. Their movement was just slightly off, like they were following a different rhythm. like something was standing among them, moving just out of sync with the rest of the world. A sharp noise rang out from inside the house, the sound of static blasting from the kitchen radio. I spun around, heart hammering. The screen on the radio flickered, showing rapid flashes of numbers, symbols, and brief images of something that looked almost like a face. It wasn't human, too many eyes, too much symmetry. The second I focused on it, the image glitched away. The house shuddered. I thought it was my imagination at first, but then I saw the picture frames on the wall tilt slightly, like the entire building had just shifted forward an inch. My breath came fast and shallow. I stepped toward Eli's room, my gut screaming at me to wake him up and leave. But then I heard something outside, a low, mechanical hum, like an engine idling, but deeper, layered, almost like a voice speaking through vibrations. The sound wasn't coming from the ground. It was above the house. The hum pulsed through the walls, resonating in my chest. It made me feel lightheaded, slightly disconnected, like reality itself was bending. I stepped to the window and looked up. The stars were gone, not covered by clouds, just gone. The sky was a deep, endless black, and in that blackness, something moved. A shape, a shadow too big, too still to be a cloud. And then the counting started. A whisper coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Soft at first, but growing, overlapping voices counting in a language I didn't recognize. I took a step back from the window. My hands were shaking. I turned to run for Eli's room, just as the TV let out a sharp, ear-piercing whine. The symbols were back, flashing faster than my eyes could track. My vision blurred at the edges, and my thoughts felt disjointed, skipping like a scratched record. I reached for the power cord to yank it out, and the screen snapped to a single image. A live feed of the porch. The camera must have been positioned just above the door, pointing down. The porch was empty, just wood and darkness. Then something shifted into frame. Long fingers wrapped around the edge of the screen. Slowly, impossibly slow, a figure pulled itself into view, unfolding from the shadows. It wasn't walking, it was stretching forward, pulling itself closer, limbs too fluid, too precise. The camera glitched, the feed skipping like corrupted video. The figure snapped forward several feet instantly, and then its head turned upward. Not toward the door, toward the camera, toward me. It knew I was watching. My chest seized. The feed cut to static. The whispering voices grew louder, counting faster, overlapping. Reality buckled. The sound was inside my skull now, pressing against my thoughts. 1, 2, 3, 4. The house tilted again, the walls bending inward, shadows pooling in the corners like liquid. The hum from outside turned to a low droning pulse, shaking the air itself. Something was about to happen, something I wasn't supposed to witness. And then I felt it move inside the house, closer. I couldn't breathe. The pressure in the room had changed, like the air had thickened around me, pressing against my skin. My ears rang with the residual hum from whatever was outside, whatever was above the house. The counting had stopped. The silence was worse. I turned toward Eli's room, my legs moving stiffly, like the space between me and the door had stretched just slightly beyond what should be possible. Every step felt wrong, like gravity wasn't fully on my side anymore. I reached for the door handle. Something shifted behind me. A sound, impossibly soft. A single, elongated breath. My instinct screamed at me not to turn around. Every part of me knew I wouldn't like what I saw. The air felt charged, like static before a lightning strike. It was inside the house now. I forced myself to move, shoving open Eli's door. He was awake, sitting up in bed, completely calm. He wasn't scared, he wasn't crying. He was just watching me, tilting his head slightly like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. "Eli, we have to go," I whispered. My voice sounded thin, distorted, like it wasn't fully mine anymore. He didn't respond. His eyes flicked toward the ceiling, toward the deep vibration that was still pulsing through the house. I stepped closer and grabbed his hand. It was ice cold. He blinked like I had pulled him out of a trance, and for the first time, I saw something break through his blank expression. Not fear, acceptance. "It's okay," he said softly. "They're just checking on me." A loud creak came from the hallway. The door behind me had opened. The space beyond it was too dark, too empty, like light itself refused to exist past that threshold. My entire body screamed to run. Eli wasn't moving. His small fingers tightened around mine as if to stop me from leaving. "You can come with us," he whispered. "I think they'd let you." I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. The air behind me had shifted again, a weight pressing against my back. I knew. If I turned around, I would see it standing there. The thing from the camera. The thing that had been watching all along. I didn't turn. I grabbed Eli, pulling him into my arms as I ran. I ran through the house, through the shifting air, through the unnatural silence that felt thick with something unseen. I didn't look at the windows. I didn't look at the doorways. I didn't look at the walls, where I swore I could feel shapes pressing against them as if the structure itself had become a membrane. I hit the front door, yanking it open. The air outside felt wrong, too still, like the entire world was holding its breath. The trees weren't swaying anymore. The stars were still gone. Everything above me was pure black. And in that blackness, something shifted, not in the air, but inside my head. A slow, inevitable pull, like the pressure of an incoming tide. My vision blurred. I couldn't remember why I was running anymore. My grip on Eli loosened. My mind felt blank. A voice, deep and layered, vibrated somewhere beneath my skull. "You are seen." The words weren't spoken. They were placed inside me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My body had stopped listening. And then, light. Blinding, soundless light. A flash that erased everything. I woke up in my own bed. The sheets were damp with sweat, my head pounding like I had the worst hangover of my life. I sat up, dazed, confused. I didn't remember coming home. I didn't remember the drive. The parents never called. The house was gone from my GPS history, as if I had never been there. But there was one thing, a single thing I couldn't explain. On my forearm, just above my wrist, was a thin, circular burn, small, almost perfectly symmetrical, like something had pressed against my skin and left a mark before letting me go, or before putting me back. We went camping deep in the national forest, somewhere way off the grid. No cell service, no roads for miles, just trees stretching endlessly in every direction. It was supposed to be an escape, a weekend to disconnect, just the two of us. The first night was normal, fire, drinks, stories under the stars. But at some point in the dead of night, I woke up. Not because of a sound, but because of the absence of one. The crickets had stopped. The wind had died. The air itself felt too still, pressing against my skin like static before a storm. I sat up in the tent, heart pounding, and turned to wake her. But she was already sitting up, facing the entrance, completely still. The tent flap was open just an inch, and she was staring through it, unblinking. "Babe?" I whispered. She didn't respond, just sat there, eyes locked on something outside. I followed her gaze, but all I saw was blackness. No movement, no sound, just an overwhelming sense that something was watching back. The moment I touched her shoulder, she flinched violently, like I had yanked her out of a dream. Then she just turned to me, smiled like nothing was wrong, and lay back down. "Go to sleep," she murmured. The next morning, I barely remembered it. I brushed it off as nothing, but she was different after that, just slightly off. She was always a deep sleeper, but after that night, she started waking up before me. I'd find her standing at the window in our apartment, staring outside like she was waiting for something. Her speech had changed too, just subtly enough that no one else would notice. A fraction of a second delay between my words and her responses, like she was running them through a filter before answering. She stopped blinking as much. At first, I told myself I was imagining things, stress, overthinking. But then I caught her watching me. It was always out of the corner of my eye, peeking from behind doors, from around corners. The worst was one night when I was brushing my teeth. I bent down to spit into the sink, and when I looked up, she was standing just outside the bathroom door, grinning. I hadn't heard her come in, hadn't felt her presence. She was just there, staring at me like she was expecting something. The moment I reacted, she laughed like it was all a joke. "You're so jumpy," she teased, stepping forward and kissing my cheek like nothing had happened. But her lips felt cold, too cold. The next morning, I woke up alone. I found her standing in the kitchen, perfectly still, facing the fridge, not touching it, not moving, just standing there like a mannequin, waiting for instructions. I hesitated before calling her name. When I did, her head snapped toward me, too fast, too precise, like the movement wasn't fully human. She smiled, but it felt wrong, like she was copying a memory of how a person should smile. "I made coffee," she said. Her voice was normal, but something about it wasn't. I should have left then. I should have grabbed my keys, walked out, and never looked back, but I didn't. And that's how I learned that whatever had come back from that camping trip with me wasn't her anymore. I started noticing more things after that morning, small details that wouldn't mean anything on their own, but together they painted a picture I didn't want to look at. Her breathing was different, slower, more measured. At night, when I lay awake beside her, I counted. One inhale, an impossible pause, then the slowest exhale I'd ever heard, like she was practicing how to seem normal. She didn't shiver in the cold anymore, didn't fidget, didn't stretch, didn't yawn. It was like she had memorized how a person should act, but didn't actually need to do those things herself. And then there was the mirror. The first time it happened, I was half asleep, barely paying attention. She was standing in front of the mirror in the bedroom, brushing her hair. I glanced up, about to say something, and then I froze. The reflection was a half-second behind. I watched as her arm lifted the brush after she had already started brushing. The delay was tiny, almost imperceptible, but I knew what I saw. I sat up slowly, swallowing hard, trying not to let my face betray me. "Babe?" I called softly. She turned, smiling like nothing was wrong. The mirror copied her a beat later. I blinked hard, forcing myself to keep my breathing steady. "What?" she asked. I wanted to test it again, but my gut told me I didn't want to know the answer. "Nothing," I muttered, lying back down. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I set up my phone in the living room, angled toward the couch where she usually sat in the evenings. I hit record, locked the screen, and pretended to scroll while we watched TV. She sat there, staring blankly at the screen, not reacting to the show at all. Every few minutes, she'd tilt her head slightly, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. When the episode ended, she stood up and walked toward the hallway. The moment she turned the corner, I grabbed my phone and checked the recording. The video was corrupted. It played in brief, jittery bursts, filled with static and flickering distortions. I skipped forward, trying to find a clear frame, and then I did. A single frame, just for a split second, frozen between flickers of static. She was sitting on the couch, but her face wasn't right. Her eyes were too big. Her mouth was stretched open slightly, her teeth just visible. Not smiling, not frowning, just waiting. Like she knew I was recording. And then, at the very last frame, before the footage cut out completely, her head turned toward the camera, and her mouth moved. But there was no audio, no sound at all. Just that impossible image of her looking right at me. I dropped my phone like it had burned me. My stomach clenched, my skin crawling with something primal. She was still in the other room. I could hear her shifting slightly, pacing slow, deliberate, like she was waiting for something. That's when I realized I had never actually told her I was recording. She just knew. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I just lay there in the dark, my body rigid, listening to the sound of her breathing, slow, too slow, measured. And then, sometime past midnight, she moved, not like shifting in her sleep. There was no tossing, no stirring. She just sat up. I felt it more than I saw it, the way the mattress barely shifted under her weight. I kept my breathing steady, faking sleep, but I could feel her watching me, not looking, watching. My skin prickled with the weight of her gaze. Seconds stretched into minutes. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. She was waiting for something. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, she got up. I heard the soft creak of the floorboards as she walked across the room, slow and deliberate. I cracked my eyes open, just barely. She was standing by the window, facing outside, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. The glass reflected just enough moonlight to show me her mouth was moving, but no sound came out. I stayed frozen, barely breathing, my pulse hammering in my skull, and then she stopped. She turned. Her head twitched too fast, like a motion that hadn't fully rendered. And then, in the pitch darkness, I saw it. Her eyes. For the first time, they weren't right. Too wide, too still, and deep inside them, something flickered. A reflection that shouldn't exist. A sky without stars. A vast, empty blackness stretching into infinity. And then, she smiled. I've gotten better at hiding it. My body seized with terror, every muscle screaming at me to move, but I couldn't. Not until she took a step toward me, not until I saw the way her fingers twitched at her sides, stretching just slightly too long before snapping back to normal. That's when I ran. I didn't grab my keys. I didn't grab my phone. I just bolted out of the room, down the hall, out the front door. The night air hit me like a wave of ice, but I didn't stop running. I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs burned, until the streetlights of my brother's neighborhood came into view. I banged on his door, half mad with fear, barely able to choke out what had happened. He let me in, confused, worried, trying to get me to make sense. But I couldn't, because none of it made sense. And then, just as I started to feel the first hint of safety, my phone buzzed. I shouldn't have looked, I know that now. But I did. And there it was, a text from her, no words, just a photo, a dark, grainy image taken from the street outside my brother's house, and in the photo, standing under the nearest streetlight, was her, staring at the camera, smiling. And then, a second text, I found you. Thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate all the kind comments. If you liked this video, drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts and know if you enjoy these kinds of videos. Until next time.